When composing the UI layout, one of the questions that you have to ask yourself when first designing your web application is, do I need one layout for all the web application, or am I going to need multiple layouts for different areas? Some examples of this are, if you have one layout for like a public section for all anonymous users, but then say you have a protected area for members and or administrators, you can technically have several layouts defined for those other areas besides the main one that encompasses the root part of the web application. Another question you might ask yourself is, where do I reference the JavaScript and CSS libraries? Well, traditionally you would reference these in your ideal master page, if you will, if you're using web forms, or your layout is where you technically still reference these. However, in MVC4 it's slightly different. Here we have everything bundled up in the, well, bundle.config. MVC4 has this concept of referencing your JavaScript and CSS files within this configuration file, and then within your layout page you can reference whichever bundle of JavaScript or CSSs you would like, or as many as you'd like. This way you can actually allow MVC to obfuscate and minify those files when a release build is triggered, which is pretty cool. And of course you can reference these bundles, like I said, in the main layout page. You don't have to reference all the bundles that you define in the layout page, but they are all there if you'd like to define them. One of the buzzwords that's been spreading out around the internet for the past couple years has been a responsive framework, or having your design responsive. What this is this is a framework that is used to automatically adjust content and size. And later on we'll get into the adaptive user interface, which actually encompasses responsive frameworks. Like I said, this is becoming the new normal in web design, as people expect the website to tailor to whatever device that they're viewing it as, and not have to conform to specific standards that the website is demanding. Gone are the days of the website saying, I am going to be 1,000 pixels wide, and I don't care if you have a 50-inch monitor, I am going to stay at 1,000 pixels wide. That's just kind of not acceptable anymore of a lot of today's popular websites. If you go to, whether it's Facebook or Google or other sites like that, you'll notice that they kind of expand or contract to what kind of browser that you're looking at it with. It can tell the difference between if you're viewing it from a computer or a laptop, or an iPad or Android tablet, or even a mobile phone. And the idea is to give different experiences based on the device that you're actually viewing the site with. So this is definitely a good way to go, but for a lot of people who design MVC, not all of us can be designers and be JavaScript, CSS gurus that want to spend all this time making sure all this is right. So there are all these frameworks, just like there are jQuery libraries out there on the internet. There are all these frameworks that designers have put in time and figured all that stuff out for you, where all you have to do is essentially just interject your code into their framework and then just let it ride. And some of these frameworks out there on the net that are really popular are like the Less framework that's been around for a little bit, Foundation, which is from a design company out on the West Coast called Zerb, which I use them quite a bit in my MVC apps. You have Bootstrap that a lot of people know, YAML, and there are many more that are out there. But like I said, you definitely want to take a look at this, because why recreate the wheel when you can just use some of their framework out there and then adapt your design to their framework, opposed to having your design and then trying to apply their framework to your design, because that never really works out that well. Now we're going to look at what the main parts of a layout actually are made up of. First, we have your CSS and JavaScript references, and these are referenced either traditionally or by bundle name. Now, in some cases you may have to reference a JavaScript library traditionally by using the script tag in the source property, linking directly to your JavaScript file if one of two things is true. A, it's being called from a CDN from around the world, like if you're calling jQuery library from a Google CDN or an Amazon Web Services CDN. Obviously, you can't bundle that into your web application during a release build because it doesn't exist on your server. So that's an example where you'd have to reference it traditionally. Another example is if you're using a third-party control, like whether it's from Telric, Infragistics, Component One, etc., that just doesn't like to be bundled because some of those third-party tools or those JavaScript libraries actually have their own version of jQuery built into their system. So sometimes they just don't like being bundled. And rhyme or reason, not sure, but they just don't like doing that. So moving on, everything else should be able to be bundled, and then you can minify and obfuscate it based on the release build of MVC4. The next thing that we're going to look at is the main navigation. Now this can be hard-coded or dynamic. You can also use a partial view, or you can have it directly baked into the layout. No matter which way you go, obviously I prefer a partial view here because then you can just work with just the partial view and know it'll always end up in the same place and you won't interfere with other things within the layout page. And again, it goes back to the dry method of, don't repeat yourself. Not that you're going to call the menu many times throughout the site, but you never know. It's just a little cleaner way of development. Here in the menu, you can actually have it look to see if the user is authenticated or not to control your login or my profile / logout links or the main navigation itself. If you have certain links that are defined only for members or administrators, you can hide them based on roles and so forth using the razor syntax and within the menu partial view itself. Other main area is the body section. This can be wrapped by other HTML that formats everything a view throws at it. So you don't have to have your entire body tag. You can have your main framework in there, and then say for all the content that gets loaded, load into this specific div that has all these CSS styles in it and other things like that. Another part is the footer, which again, just like the main navigation, this can be hard-coded or dynamic, and you can use a partial view here as well if you have a lot of data, just to keep your main layout page pretty light and structured. There are several CMSs that I've seen that actually take the dry method to the extreme, that is, where they have several layouts that kind of reference each other, almost like layers of a cake. And obviously you can get as expansive as you want or as simple as you want. It pretty much is whatever you want to design. Other parts are layout sections, which some standard sections like body, scripts, or in the MVC template there is the feature section. These are places where you can interject your code from a view and say go to this spot. In this case, go to this section, and that's where I want you to render out within the layout page. You can create custom sections. In a lot of my code, I actually create a section called head scripts that renders out right before the closing of the head tag, just before the body starts. And what that will allow me to do is from any view, if I need some JavaScript code that absolutely has to be in the head tag of an HTML page, I can just reference this section, say go throw this code in that spot, and be really good. And this is kind of how that looks like creating your own custom section. You essentially just say, call the @renderSection method and define whatever you want it called. Here I call it head scripts. Then you have a boolean for true or false if it's required. And here in my case I just say no, it's not required, so I set it to false.